Hey guys, thanks for taking the time to watch this. Some months ago, I created a video that was kind of the part one to this. I wasn't 100% sure I was going to make a part two, but just through a lot of thought and consideration over the last few months, decided I wanted to expand on this a little bit. So before I get into this, I want to make it really clear that I'm not trying to do anything to like trick you or get to a point where, see, you can't deny this kind of thing. These are just the things in life that are so deeply important to me that not sharing them with you is basically not right. So I'm just going to expand on this. Should be a little shorter than the first video. Again, thanks for just taking the time to just take a look at this and hear what I have to say. I'm going to do a brief overview of that first video I made where we talked about origin, meaning, morality, and destiny, and me saying that those are really the biggest questions in life. Where do we come from? Does life have meaning outside of myself? How do I define what is moral and what isn't? And essentially what happens to us ultimately. Again, these are the critical questions in life. And, the reality is whether or not any one of us will, you know, get into a conversation with anybody else about these things or discuss it, we've all formed answers to these questions. One of your answers might be, well, that's not important. That's still an answer to the question. So everybody has a worldview. Yours might not have an official name or, quotes, religious title, but everybody has a worldview. Everybody has, to some extent, formulated answers to these questions. I also made the point that truth is not relative. There's objective truth out there to virtually every question, especially these four answers to these four big questions in life. And also, our feelings, convictions, or beliefs don't dictate truth. The truth is what it is. It does not bend to our personal convictions or beliefs. And the main point being that if something is true, it's true whether or not we believe it. And no matter how much you believe something does not make it true. You can't force something into existence by just the sheer power of belief. There are true objective realities to these four important questions of origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. So again, that's kind of the recap of last time. So before we move on, just want to make a few points here. There's some topics that I'm going to bring up, and I'm not going to drill down deep into any one of them. I'm just going to kind of state them and leave it there. And the big reason is because you got to be careful with rabbit trails. Human beings have a propensity of creating confusion, so we try to make it more difficult for ourselves to discover truth in a lot of cases. We do that on purpose. We like to create rabbit trails because, then we can say, well, answers to that are impossible to find, so let's not bother looking. So moving on to sort of expanding this conversation, once we look at a worldview and how it answers these four questions, then you have to take that worldview and hold it up to three tests. The first thing is it has to be logically consistent, and then it has to be empirically adequate, and then it has to be experientially relevant. Okay, now I know some of that is wordy, but it's really the simplest way to put this. And I didn't come up with this. This is a simple description that an author that I've read before, he didn't invent these concepts. He just sort of encapsulated it Logic is logic no matter who's outlining it or putting labels on things. So anyway, you'll understand what these three things mean here as I define them here. So let's look at logically consistent. So let's take a worldview. Okay, as the worldview, and again, we all have one. Okay, there's nobody out there that says, well, I don't have a worldview, so I don't need to sort of consider these things. You have a worldview. You have come to personal conclusions on these four areas. And again, your personal view, your worldview on, for example, the question of origin might be, well, that's not important. Okay, well, that is your answer to the question of origin. And the same thing with these others. But the point being, as you answer these four questions, however you answer them, there should not be major logical flaws within the essential claims. So it has to be logically consistent. Okay, in other words, it should make sense within itself. And again, I don't want to drill down deep into this. I just want to say that a worldview, in order for us to put any kind of trust in it or further explore it, has to pass these three tests. This is the first one. Has to be logically consistent. Has to be empirically adequate. What does that mean? It basically means there should be empirical evidence that supports the essential claims that it makes about these four questions. Now, this is where a lot of people will sort of try to run things off the roads. You may have heard of Richard Dawkins, and I'm not going to get into my personal view on Richard Dawkins, but he, for example, will compare Christianity to believing in what he calls the, quote, flying spaghetti monster. This is just incredibly disingenuous because there's no historical evidence for the existence of a flying spaghetti monster. If you just dream up a concept and give a name to it, that is not like comparing it to something that actually has documentary historical evidence for it. So the point being that the worldview that you're considering has to have some empirical evidence that it is experientially relevant. This is the last test. The individual experience of following the worldview should be relevant to the most critical parts of my life. In other words, if it's consistent in its logic and there's empirical evidence for it, as I walk it out, it should have an application to my life, the most important parts. It should challenge me morally and intellectually, and it should change me. So, if the worldview makes these claims about these four big questions, and I actually follow the worldview, it should make some changes within me and how I live. And it should sustain me through good and bad times. So, it doesn't fly out the window when a tough time comes, and it should give me even more sort of peace and happiness, through the good times. Again, I don't want to drill down into these things right now. I'm just saying that after we answer those four questions and say, okay, that's the worldview, now I've got to hold it up to these three tests. All three of these tests, as I've said, they have to be passed in order for the worldview to be considered objectively true. It has to be logically consistent, empirically adequate, and experientially relevant. So I'm going to ask you just for the next few minutes to participate in a quick experiment. Again, I'm not trying to trick you or pull a gotcha on you. I just actually want you to just, as I go through these next few slides, really consider how you're feeling about what I'm saying. Again, I'm not trying to convince you of anything. I don't think you can ultimately convince people of some of the things that I'm about to claim. I think that person has to honestly be looking for truth and be open to it. And then a conversation or an explanation can help guide along that path. But I don't believe I can talk you in. I don't for a second believe I can talk you into anything. This is more really about me just taking the complete lid off the worm jar, and just kind of letting it all out, really. You will notice that the following statements that I make don't start with the phrases I believe or I think. And this is the experiment. As I talk through the next slide or two, just pay attention to how you feel and kind of keep track of that. I'm just going to make some statements here. Christianity is the only worldview that sufficiently responds to all three tests. It's logically consistent, it's empirically adequate, and it's experientially relevant. Now, I want to stop right there and say the typical response to this is, well, you're being arrogant. You think you have the truth, and everybody else who doesn't have the truth is stupid. That's not what I'm saying. I'm trying to make the point that there is objective truth out there, the answers to these big questions. I answer them this way, and every single worldview does the same thing. The minute you open your mouth to answer one of these questions, you're making a truth claim, and by definition will exclude another worldview. So Christianity can't take the hit for that one religion that or worldview that excludes others. In fact, if you're disagreeing with this statement that I just made, you're excluding me. So, okay, I just want to make that point. I am not saying that people that don't agree with this are dumb or should be put in a small cell somewhere or aren't as good as me. That's not the point of this. God exists. He's eternal. He's all-knowing, all-powerful, all-present, and perfectly good and loving. He entered time and history by becoming human. He was tortured and murdered for claiming to be God. And a few days after his murder, he was alive again. And those last two things make it possible for you to know God and be with him forever. It's also important to note that he's still alive. The murder and the resurrection was not the end of the story. And he's crazy about you. Some of us are so bad at walking this out that, if we're supposed to be reflections of this, you can look at someone like me a lot of the time and be like, what is that all about? But I'd ask you not to judge him because of people like me. I'm probably, if you know any Christians, probably the worst one you know. But he's good, even when I'm not. And he wants to be close to you and be with you forever. God's not waiting up in the sky with some cosmic hammer waiting to whack you every time you do something wrong. Now, be honest. How did you feel when I was making those statements? Did you get angry? Uncomfortable? Did you roll your eyes? And if you did any of those things, ask yourself honestly, why? And then think, what do you think made you react that way? Why am I sharing this now? Well, I hope it's been evident over the last few years that I care about you guys. And I want to make it really clear that I'm not sharing this stuff because I want you to be good or better or come and vote for the same people that I do. That's completely not anywhere near the point. Christianity is not a club of people that all want to be good and look down on other people. Although I have to say that the church, especially in America, presents itself that way a lot of the time. But I can tell you that that wasn't his initial vision for the church. And man, I just want you to experience the incredible peace and security of knowing God. And I want you to live forever. So, anyway, didn't mean to get all sappy or whatever. I don't expect you to respond to this. I just wanted to say it finally.